Hey everybody, welcome to Truth Be Told. Thanks very much for being here. I want to start off today's episode by giving a quick note to those listening on the podcast specifically. Last week's episode, I did an interview with astronaut Charlie Duke, and I loved that interview. It went really well. I thought it was a great episode, and it did really well on YouTube because there was a lot of like video and audio and pictures and stuff. On the podcast side of things, it didn't do so well. And maybe that's just because it didn't do so well. That happens sometimes. That's totally fine. But I did wonder if one of the reasons might be because rather than starting with the intro music and everything that people are used to hearing, it starts with a video clip. If you're listening on the podcast, it's just an audio clip of Charlie Duke in space, like performing a task. It's kind of like a funny thing. But there's like some static. It's a little, staticky and just not the best audio quality because it's literally a transmission from space. But I wondered if people may have heard that and listened for a few seconds and been like, this is not the right thing. This is not what I'm used to hearing. So they clicked off of it. If that's you, I'd highly recommend going back and checking it out because I thought it was a great episode, a really cool interview, but it does just start out differently than most other episodes. So wanted to give that little caveat there. And, if that's not you and it just didn't do well because it didn't do well, that's fine, but I figured I'd at least share that. But today, I want to talk about something that I came across in a rereading of a story. I've been going through the Bible trying to separate out my Bible reading from my Bible studying, if that makes sense. Like sometimes when I start reading, I get too much into study. Like I will go really slowly and not take a whole section for what it's worth. I will look into certain words and phrases and ask questions and write things in my margins. It just goes really slowly. And I love doing that. Those deep dives are great. But sometimes I do that and then neglect just reading, like reading the story and reading what happened. So I've been really trying to read more, but it's been going kind of slow, and I have been waylaid by taking notes and stuff. But I made it to Exodus, got through Genesis a couple weeks ago, and I made it to Exodus. And this thing in the rereading stuck out to me different than it ever has before. And so I wanted to share that with you because I think it's very applicable. Probably you can find certain ways it's applicable in your own life, but it definitely felt very applicable to my life. And it's kind of a nuanced thing, so I'm hoping I can communicate it effectively. But in the book of Exodus, when the plagues come to Egypt, especially the first two, which are the water in Egypt turning to blood and frogs, the magicians of Pharaoh leap into this frenzy of action where they try to recreate these events. And I want to just read that to you real quick. It starts in chapter 7 and goes into chapter 8 as well of Exodus. But Moses is kind of concerned that Pharaoh's not going to listen to him. God gives him some reassurance. And he says, he's not going to listen to you. His heart's going to be hardened, and then I'm going to send these signs upon Egypt. And this starts in verse 14. It says, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is going out to the water. Stand on the bank of the Nile to meet him, and take in your hand the staff that turned into a serpent, and you shall say to him, the Lord your God, or not the Lord your God, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But so far you have not obeyed. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water that is in the Nile, and it shall turn into blood. And this happens. The Nile turns to blood, but not only that, the rivers, the canals, the ponds, all the pools of water, and even household vessels filled with water turn to blood. So there is no fresh water in all of Egypt. And then Pharaoh sends out people to dig at the banks of the Nile, and they gather just enough fresh water to barely survive. But then in verse 22 it says, but the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts. So Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said. So this happens. The first plague happens, and the Pharaoh sends to his magicians, and he says, we need to do something about this. And the response of the magicians is to try and recreate this miracle that God did. Then in chapter 8, he's going to send frogs on the people of Egypt. And it says, the frog shall come upon you and your people and on all your servants. The Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals, over the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So he did, and the frogs come. But then in verse 7, it says, but the magicians did the same by their secret arts and made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Now, I've known this story. I've heard this story. I knew that the magicians did this. This was like in the Prince of Egypt movie by DreamWorks that I saw when I was a little kid. Like, they even got that part historically right. I knew this happened, but for some reason it struck me very differently this read through. And I think it struck me differently because on this read through, I asked the question, why are they so concerned with replicating what God has sent upon them? And that might seem like a weird question, right? Like, well, they're obviously trying to show their power, but why do it in this way? Wouldn't it have been better if they had tried to undo what God had done? But that's not what they choose to do. They are so focused on revealing their power through their gods that they are willing to add to the curses placed on them, rather than consider for a moment the legitimacy of God or the power of God to be able to undo what he's already done. They're so afraid of legitimizing God. They can't just say, wow, your God is powerful, he's done an amazing thing, let's see what our gods can do to fight against that. They're trying to delegitimize God. Their big concern is delegitimizing God by showing their own power to do the exact same thing. And they're willing to add to the curse that God has placed on the land and on them in order to do this. And I just think this is wild. This is absolutely wild to me. All of their water has turned to blood, even in household vessels. They have no fresh water left. We're going to have all of Egypt digging at the banks of the Nile to try and get a tiny bit of fresh water just so we can survive. And you know what we're going to do with a little bit of it? We're going to turn it to blood. Like, that is insane to me. Or frogs are coming up out of the water. They are in everything. You cannot take a step in the land of Egypt without squishing and killing a bunch of frogs. They're in your food. They're in your water. They're in the streets. They're dying and they're stinking everything up. You know what we need right now? More frogs. Like, that's the effort that they put all their work into with their secret arts and their cooperation with their pagan gods is we need to do frogs like God did frogs. Now, after this is gnats coming up from the dust, and they can't replicate that one. But it's really interesting that up until this point, their focus is on delegitimizing God to maybe in the face of other people seeing his power and wanting to delegitimize him so that Egyptians don't follow after him. But their focus is not on their own safety, their own well-being, the safety of their people, the well-being of their people. It's not on, wow, this God is powerful, I didn't even know about him before. It's just about delegitimizing, even to my own hurt, to my own expense. Let's not pray to our own gods and pray that these things go away, that our gods protect us. Let's not recognize the power of the God that sent them. Let's see if we can fix the problem, the bigger problem probably in their minds, of people legitimizing this God by showing that we're just as powerful as he is, that our gods are just as powerful as him. Let's look at this curse on us and on our land and add to it rather than recognizing the power that sent it. And I think this response is just unnatural in so many ways. It'd be like stepping on a piece of glass that's sharp, and instead of lifting your foot off of it and holding it up off the ground, you press it down into the ground even further. It's like, this is just unnatural. We don't respond this way. But for whatever reason, in the face of God, certain people's hearts can turn into this weird, hardened thing that responds in this way, that just only becomes more and more hardened to what God has done in a certain moment. And I just think this is unnatural. It shows the unnaturalness of it, I think, that they're willing to add to the curses that God has placed on them, rather than legitimize his authority, his power, and request that he remove the plagues. Pharaoh seems to a little bit, actually. He's like, all right, I don't want this to happen anymore. Please stop. But then once the magicians can do it, he's like, okay, maybe you're not as powerful as I thought you were. Like, we can do the same thing. So these magicians are really locked into this idea of delegitimizing God more than they're concerned about getting rid of the plagues. And I think that's just weird. And at first when I read through this, the very first thought in my head was atheists. It seems like this is what they do as well. Rather than consider for a moment that Christian claims might be true or legitimate, many of them would rather spend their entire lives fighting for the idea that morality is subjective, that it's made up by us, there is no real right or wrong, it's just in our own perception. Or they'll fight for the idea that life has no greater meaning than just the physical birth to death span that we get. Or fighting for the idea that there is nothing beyond ourselves or beyond this life. They look at life, they're not convinced that there is a God, but rather than, in so many cases, genuinely asking the question, or doing the good research, or engaging with Christians in a way that says, I kind of hope what you say is true, even if I am not sure about it, they would rather spend their time tearing down that idea, delegitimizing that idea. And I'm not saying, there are some atheists that I think do genuinely ask the question, but for one reason or another conclude that they just can't be convinced of a God. I think there are good-hearted atheists that do this, but I think some of them, it seems like they almost are desperate to be right, that they're willing to add, it's like originally you got atheists hundreds of years ago that aren't convinced there's a God and they would debate it, but now it's we've gone down several new avenues to try and block off any belief in God. It's well, what about morality? It's fine, I guess I have to deny morality too. It's they've been willing to deny so many things just to delegitimize the idea of God. Where in my mind, I'm do you not hope that you're wrong? And I'm not saying hope to the point where you ignore evidence, or hope to the point where you turn a blind eye to the things you're uncertain about or have doubts about. Christians have uncertainty. Christians have doubt. But just a hope, at least a little, that you could be wrong. In this state of agnosticism where you think, I'm not really sure, you'd think, your mindset would be towards hope, but instead it's so often towards proving that all the horrible things they believe about the universe are true, in effect adding to the curse that they believe that they're under. But the more that I thought about this, so often, my brain is apologetic. It goes towards atheists and Christians and how I might convince. I really want to get away from that, though, because it only leads to difficulty. But the more that I thought about this, the more I think that even while it's true that atheists might do this, Christians do this just as often, just in slightly different ways. Pharaoh and his magicians refused to surrender to the idea that God was any more powerful than they were. Atheists refused to surrender to the idea that God exists, or any God exists that is greater than themselves, in effect making them the superior, supreme beings. They are their own gods. But Christians, I think, have forgotten how to surrender as well. And I say this not in condemnation or pointing the finger at anybody. I say this because I think I've forgotten how to also. And this is where it gets a little bit nuanced, but I am hoping I can explain this very clearly. I think so often we feel a certain way or experience a certain thing, and our first response is to figure out what we need to do about it, what we need to do more of, what we need to do less of. And it's not wrong to do your part, right? It's not wrong to consider how you might need to align yourself with God better, or consider what God might be prompting you to do through this circumstance. But there are times where I believe we go way overboard and add to our problem, add to the curse, by not responding with surrender first. Imagine your problem is spiritual exhaustion. Many of you listening might feel this. I have felt this, regularly. This happens to Christians sometimes. You're just exhausted spiritually. You feel like you haven't been restored spiritually in a while. This is your problem. How often is it that we respond with feeling guilty and feeling like we need to add more Bible study, add more prayer, figuring out what we're doing wrong and meditating on that, what is causing this situation, to get back in control? The problem is spiritual exhaustion, and our solution is, what more work can I do to control that feeling? Or imagine you struggle with insecurity. How often is our response to desire or pursue achievement or recognition or a more secure place in our social or our professional circles, rather than resting in the identity of Jesus Christ, being like, you know what, who and what I am is so much less important than who and what you are. And if who I am is not rooted in who you are, then it's all for nothing anyways. How often is it instead to find our own security in our own places? The problem is insecurity, and our solution is to solidify security or identity in places that don't last. How often is that the case? I think all the time. Now, I'm not saying that bettering yourself is wrong or a waste of time. I'm not saying that prayer or Bible study or fasting are bad solutions to problems at times. There are times where you look at yourself and you say, I'm feeling this way, And you know what? I haven't studied in a long time, and I probably should, because when I do, I feel better, and it might be the solution to your problem. That's absolutely true. I'm not saying that asking God what he may be trying to teach you or do with you or work with you on, or what he may be wanting from you, is bad or wrong. Sometimes this is good. There are times where God does something to elicit a response from you, to say, hey, you're not on the right path. Hey, you need to knock that off. Hey, you need to do more of this. He absolutely does do that. But I think sometimes he does things for you to respond with saying, God, I'm powerless over this. I can't affect the change that I want without your help. I need you in this situation. I need you in my lack. And I think so often he's asking for this response, and we don't know how to give it. If these good things like prayer, Bible study, fasting, meditation, asking God what he might be doing in this situation, or trying to figure out what we might do to respond to it or to fix it, if those good things are acting as some kind of method for us to take control of our situation, rather than asking God to take control of it and guide you where he needs to, then these tools, I think, are being used incorrectly. Yes, sometimes you give God control, and the thing he prompts you to do is to study more, is to pray to him more, connect with him more, connect with other people, revitalize your spiritual life in some way. Yes, sometimes he does prompt you to those things, but it can't be our first response to say, oh, I just need to fix this by doing these actions. Instead, it needs to be saying, God, what do I need to do? And then him guiding you to those things. These tools are to put us back in alignment with God, not tools that we've been given to save ourselves or control the situation that feels outside of our control. Because sometimes God gives us situations outside of our control so that we rely on him, so that we can surrender. And I think we hear about this concept a lot, right? Surrender, we hear give it to God, or let go and let God. But how to do that is never really talked about. And I think it's because it is this ethereal ideal of something Christians know that we need to do, but we don't always know what it looks like. And admittedly, that's kind of where I am too. I don't have this down. Right now I'm sharing my own personal study with you. And then from that study, the feelings that I feel convicted about within myself, in my own life, this is less of a teaching and more of a sharing of my own struggle with you. So I'm not here to say this is the solution, this is the answer, even though that'd be very popular on YouTube, it'd make for a great title. This is just to say, Christians, we struggle with this. I struggle with this. I don't really know how to properly surrender. So maybe even in the comments or just in your own conversations in your life, if you want to bring this topic up with people, you can share with others how you feel you've been able to surrender in little ways, and then that might help someone else. Or you could ask someone in your own life, how do I surrender to God? How do I give things up to him, practically speaking? Because we know there is something that we should be doing, right? We don't just sit there and say, all right, God, you take care of it. I'm going to just take a nap. Like, no, we know we have a part to play. We're in cooperation with God, right? But we don't know what that balance looks like, and we don't know what giving something over to him really means. But one thing that I think has worked for me, I'll just start the conversation, right? Because I think this is how we can learn this better, to learn from one another. One thing that's helped me is to literally just say out loud to God. This isn't everything, but this is just maybe the start of it. But I'll say out loud to God, I don't know how to give this up to you. I don't know what that really looks like, God. I don't know. Because I know I probably also have to do something here. I know that you expect some response from me, but I don't know what the balance looks like of you doing things and me doing things. I don't know what the balance looks like where you're in control, but I'm doing actions, right? I don't know what that looks like, but I'd like to give it to you because I think that you will have better control of this than I could. I may not know exactly what surrender looks like in a moment, but I do believe that even wanting to want to is something that God can work with. So this is often where I've started. In the same way that I don't think I need to understand like all the science behind why this certain stretch helps this tight muscle, right? But I'll do it because it feels good and I know it's going to help. I think I don't need to, I don't think that God requires us to know the how of everything we ask for from him. But even in admitting that we don't know the how, I think it's a part of the first step. Just of just saying that we need him. God, not only do I need your help in this situation, I need your help in knowing how to seek help from you. Not only do I need your help in what I'm dealing with or what I'm feeling, but I need your help in even trusting you enough to be able to let you handle it. I need help in even understanding what it looks like to give you control and not be so anxious about whatever's going on. I need help in that. God, I see the difficulty in front of me, and I don't want to add to that difficulty by just forging my own way or, following some formula that I think should work or should put me back in control of the situation or makes me feel like I'm not powerless. Because really that's what happens, right? We feel something, we're in a certain situation, we feel powerless, and we want to regain that power. But really, with our relationship with God, we should kind of, in a way, be okay being powerless in and of ourselves, trusting that in him, we are not powerless, that he's not going to let that vulnerability cause us harm, but that vulnerability with him is actually the thing that allows him to be able to grant us power to work through the situation. As Paul says, when I am weak, then I am strong, right? In our weakness, we are not actually weak because we have God to rely on. When we go to him and admit our lack, when we go to him and say that we need him, when we go to him and attempt to rely on him or say we want to rely on him, even if we don't know how, I think that's the place where he can start working with us and we are actually at our strongest. Pharaoh's magicians saw a work of God and immediately tried to prove that they still had control. Christians do the same thing. I think it's whenever God exposes an area of weakness or sin or fear or dependence, our first response so often is to demonstrate our capability rather than admit our need or our lack. Sometimes God allows a plague not because he wants us to become stronger magicians, like stronger at doing the thing, but sometimes it's just because he wants us to stop pretending that we're magicians in the first place. Stop pretending that we do have control. Stop pretending that we don't need him or don't rely on him. He values our surrender not because he wants to see us feel weak or feel afraid or feel vulnerable or feel out of control, but because he knows that the power and relief that he can provide to us when we take steps towards allowing him to is greater than anything that we could do on our own.